Thank you very much. I am pleased to be here, but actually I'm honored to be part of such a provocative event with what I am confident will really be far-reaching consequences. When I looked at the agenda, I felt that it was actually just right for us to be here. Now, of course, MacArthur is best known for its genius grants, where we recognize individual creativity, but we actually do much more. With annual giving at the level of $225 million a year off of a $6 billion endowment, we actually are active in 65 countries on an array of issues that include human rights, conservation, population, and here at home in the United States, housing, juvenile justice, urban policy, and more. And for the past 2 decades, education. Now, after 2 years of exploration, as Connie said, late last year, we announced a $50 million 5-year investment in digital media and learning. Now, that's a departure for us, because after those 2 decades of support for school reform and for education, we're now turning our attention to an inquiry into learning. More specifically, we're looking at the notion that young people are changing as a result of their interaction with digital media. And the program is designed to explore the premise that digital media is actually transforming the nature of learning, from the passive receipt of information to active participation in production. That it might actually be transforming how young people interact, how they organize socially, how they play, how they imagine, how they think, how they solve problems, how they develop their identity, how they confront ethical dilemmas, how they understand and judge information. Now, if this is true, of course, there are powerful implications for schools, for other learning institutions, for family, and even for democracy. Now, during the past half-century, school reform has been focused on changes in governance, standards, assessment, teacher quality, all worthy efforts, to be sure. But we think that digital media may, in the end, actually create a different pathway to transforming public education. Now, our program is based on 3 central ideas. First, that schools are not only or even the primary place for learning. The school is a node in a network of learning places and experiences. Second, that change is more likely to occur at the edge. Let's not start with the district, the central office, or even the classroom. Let's bring pressure to bear on the core from the library, the museum, the after-school program. And third, and above all, we think it's important to learn about learning from young people themselves. Understanding how and to what effect young people are participating and producing through digital media just may lead to new theories and new paradigms for learning. New insights into the design of learning environments may actually complete a re-envisioning of the purpose, the style, and the structure of schools. Now, inspired by these 3 ideas, we're asking 3 questions, the questions that were noted in the video clip. First, are young people actually changing? And if they are, how? The core of that is research, both qualitative and quantitative. It's taking place at University of California in Berkeley, at USC, where scholars are looking at young people in real and in virtual places. It's taking place at Mills, where we're looking at the relationship between digital media use and civic engagement. And at Harvard, where we're digging deep into the ethical thinking of young people as they interact with digital media. And it's all in the context of their use of games, social networks, and search engines. We're developing ethnographic and quantitative databases with the goal of capturing trends and highly textured pictures of digital media use over time. Now, of course, we're eager for the research to be collaborative and cross-disciplinary, because one of our other goals is to try to build out of all this activity and energy the emerging field of digital media and learning. So this fall, I urge you to look for the first MacArthur series on digital media and learning. This is 6 edited volumes, 60 chapters on a wide array of topics that are emerging in this field. They'll be available in print and online, and most interestingly, in an online community afterward, where you'll have an opportunity for continued discussion with the authors and the editors. Now, as more research is done, I think we're likely to see traditional dichotomies disappear and distinctions begin to blur. The distinction between consumer and producer, between amateur and professional, between individual and group, between formal and informal learning, between virtual and real. After all, what is place? in the virtual world. Now, remember, our first question is, are young people changing? The second question is, are learning environments changing, and if so, how? Learning environments, of course, the resources and tools, the peer groups, the interaction with adults, curriculum. Core project in here is a new framework for media literacy based on participatory culture under the direction of Henry Jenkins at MIT. We're also supporting the development of a game where young people can actually use game design itself as a way to enhance media literacy with Jim G. at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Are young people changing? Are learning environments changing? The third question is, are social institutions changing? It's clear that informal environments may be changing, virtual worlds, massive multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft, social network spaces like MySpace. But it seems that formal institutions like schools themselves, K-12, are changing slowly. But there's much to explore here. And we want to pay special attention to libraries, to youth-run institutions, to virtual organizations, and to schools themselves. And we're seeding some early innovation in this area. Through support for the Illinois Institute of Technology Institute of Design, we're looking at libraries and the possibility of bringing into the library a space where young people can recapture the ancient art of tinkering, which has been lost in large measure, but at the same time using it as a way to tap into the resources of the library. This is called thinkering. We're also looking at what it would be like to develop a school based entirely on game principles. That's in New York. And we're also supporting the development of something called the electronic kid record, where the idea is to capture electronically the learning that's taking place wherever it occurs, whether it's after school, in a group, or while pursuing a game. The idea here is to build a portfolio so that you can demonstrate the range and the depth of learning and get a full picture of a young person that just cannot be captured by a test. Now, of course, each question is huge. We have wonderful scholars and designers working on each of them, some of them that you saw in the short video clip. And as I said, we also have the goal to help build this field. Now, we're talking about field in the broadest sense here. Of course, we're talking about academics, established, and young scholars across the many disciplines. Talking about practitioners, designers, people who represent the commercial interest, and yes, young people themselves. Now, the next thing you'll see is in midsummer an announcement for a competition with $2 million in prizes. And it's going to be managed by the quintessential virtual organization, HASTAC. Also look for the launch of our online knowledge network. What we see can be a place where everyone can connect, interact, dialogue, and learn from each other about their thinking about digital media and learning. And you'll also hear more about MacArthur's own first foray into what it will be to be a foundation with activities in a virtual world. So to get to all of this, I urge you to go to digitallearning.macfound.org, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.
We did a sound test. Okay, this is on, yes. Hi, I'm Kathy Davidson. And first, let me say, on behalf of HASTAC, everyone who's here, what a huge honor it is to be helping the MacArthur Foundation to stage this incredible competition on digital media and learning. We've had an incredible support from the MacArthur Foundation, but it's, you know, you start with a crazy idea, which is you're going to have an organization that has no walls, no disciplines, no boundaries, and all you're going to do is think together about the future of learning. And suddenly, my goodness, it happens. And then who guessed you'd find an organization with all of the distinction and caring and concern and reputation of the MacArthur Foundation that would say, we think you nuts are doing something right. You have a good idea there. So this is a hugely wonderful thing. And needless to say, there is no organization of HASTAC except a collaborative virtual organization. So HASTAC are us. And thank all of you. I want to thank all of you for this incredible 2 days. Needless to say, I've been popping in and out of sessions for the last 2 days, and every time I pop in, something amazing is happening. And so thank you all for being here, and thank you to the MacArthur Foundation for this. This fall, David and I were made PIs of a grant from the MacArthur Foundation to explore the future of learning institutions in a digital age. Since much of the MacArthur Foundation initiative had been focused on informal learning, there was then also an attempt to think about learning institutions and also to think about the role of universities in these learning institutions. And what David and I proposed was a collaborative paper looking at the future of learning institutions. We did a very rough first draft, and Bob Stein, I think I saw Bob in the audience someplace? Yes. Bob Stein, director of the Institute for the Future of the Book, had an amazing tool that allowed us to put our very rough draft up on the web, to broadcast the URL, and to invite comments. And it actually allows anyone to comment on any word in the text, and then anyone else to comment on the comments. And we have spent we posted it in January. We've been having public forums on this and gathering comments that way through face-to-face conversation. We've also been getting lots and lots of feedback from people. People often won't, this is interesting, and an unintended consequence. Often they won't respond on the public forum, but then they'll write us emails, detailed long emails about what they're not, and I'll say, please post it collaboratively, but often that won't happen. There's a kind of shyness, a virtual shyness that happens. It doesn't matter. It's all communication, including the supplementing of the commentaries that are happening virtually with the face-to-face that we're having. One of the other features of this project is Jonathan Fanton, the president of the MacArthur Foundation, set us this very interesting challenge to try to redefine what an institution is in a virtual age. And David and I came up with a cantankerous, counterintuitive definition that institutions are mobilizing networks. That we all know that institutions both contain and also that growth happens at the edges through ferment, sometimes through opposition, sometimes through radical opposition to the institution itself. So we said, what if instead of defining the institution by what's stable, we looked at how institutions work by the instability and by what institutions mobilize, either directly or in opposition, and look at what that looks like. So that's our working definition of institutions that we're using as we think about the future of learning institutions and the future of the relationship between tertiary education, universities, graduate school, the highly specialized training of professors, and that world out there. Not only what those highly specialized professors give to the world, but what we can get back from the world. Because as anybody in this room knows, there are a lot of young people out there who know a whole lot more about a lot of technologies than we know. Every time I hear someone my age complaining about the younger generation doesn't know anything, I think, what are you talking about? I mean, no generation ever knows the same material that the next generation does. But we are in the middle of an epistemic change. There have been many periods in human history where there are huge changes in technology, and as I said the other night, those are always accompanied by huge changes in art, humanities, social sciences. You can't have major changes to the technical relations of life without having major social, creative, humanist, and changes in historical and humanistic understanding of those changes. Paradigms, that's what humanists do. We make paradigms that change the way we interpret what that technology does. So one of the things David and I are interested in is how that works, how we make institutions that allow for that cross-conversation. And one of them is by using this wonderful tool to gather information. We're also going to have a Hall of Fame and a Hall of Shame. As some of you know, I got into the Wikipedia debate that's going around, that's been going around recently. There'll be some interesting places where people just do rearguard anti-technology movements, not out of critical engagement and critical thinking, which we also foster in HASTAC. HASTAC has a double role of creative use and critical understanding of technology. And we think it's necessary for great technology for those two things to go together. But we also want to have not just opposition, but critical thinking about new technologies and make institutions that allow that to happen in the most fluid, bi-directional, collaborative way.
Thank you. Let me add I first want to say good morning to my fellow panelists. I was not able to greet you sort of coming in. I want to add my thanks, my profound thanks in behalf of HASTAC to the MacArthur Foundation, as Kathy mentioned, for supporting us both in this project and in seeing in us the capacity to manage the grant competition going forward. It's an amazing thing actually to wake up in the morning and turn on the radio, and on NPR you know there's always this little sort of notice, MacArthur Foundation supporting NPR and supporting learning for children, and then to realize that you're actually involved in that project. It's it gives one a warm and fuzzy feeling as one faces the rather aggressive world each morning. Having said all that, let me just add a few thoughts to what Kathy has said in relation to the future of learning. There are a series of questions that we're interested in getting at and hearing from you all and, of course, from others, either through the site itself or even more individually and directly. We can ask, what are we teaching for? Not just how are young folks learning, but what, that is to say, what worlds and to what ends are they learning for? Where are folks learning? What are the sites they're learning in and from? What indeed, what is the content of their learning? And who are they learning with and in relation to? There's a sense in which one can almost in a cliched way say that people generally and children in particular learn all the time. We don't always like what they learn necessarily, but indeed they learn from each other, they learn from interactions, they obviously burn their hands on ovens or lighting matches, and both literally and metaphorically and so on. And so the question of learning institutions and teaching becomes how one not simply shapes, because as somebody reminded me the other day, that too is a mode of control, but facilitates their learning. How one opens up to their learning and opens them up to learning in certain sorts of ways. So learning in that sense is ubiquitous, right? And it's what they're learning for, how they're learning, and how they put that knowledge, that learned, not just information, but as was mentioned earlier, judgment, problem solving, moral considerations, interactive engagements and relationships factor into it. And the question is how learning is shaped, how it's streamed in every sense of streamed. And what are the technologies, what are the technes, you might say in that old Aristotelian way, of facilitating that learning. So let me just cite two quick examples. One is made up, something that came out of a conversation I was having with Ann Balsamo about the next HASTAC conference a year from now. Last night, and the other, an actual example. We were talking about, how to break down the walls of a conference, actually, and we were talking, we grew up with the metaphor of you're either on the bus or you're not, right? But we were thinking of even busing people between institutions and so on, and led me immediately to think, sort of in that wild moment last night. Kids walk to school, they get driven to school, but they also get on buses, right? And they sit on buses and, get up to what adults regard sometimes as no good, or they buckled in, almost policed in their seats, so to speak. And so the question becomes, what kind of learning could take place even on the bus, right? What kinds of technologies might be put up there to which they are capable of bringing their own created product. So, that's the kind of made-up example, but it indicates that there might be sites in, that we haven't yet tapped into that would be interesting learning sites where they're learning from each other, teaching themselves, engaging with each other, and so on. I know Alison Clark had a project some years ago that I'm not quite sure got completely off the ground, but it was a technology bus, right, that would travel from one neighborhood to another with technology on it that would bring into neighborhoods technological facilitation of learning in those neighborhoods that might not have them so readily available. And that might be another example. The other is, of course, we don't want kids to be stuck in chairs. We don't want them to become seat potatoes, if not couch potatoes, where they're not getting out into the world and engaging also in physical activity. Physical activity is also learning activity, but it also enables, through the flow of juices and so on, for them to come back into more structured learning environments. There was an incredible project that was put together by De Waag Society. De Waag Society is a technology learning facility literally at the center of Amsterdam, in the old 15th, 16th century building on the Nieuwe Markt. And it's a wonderful place. It's actually the site, the Rembrandt painting of the anatomy lesson is painted actually in that building. And the building, the outside structure of the building looks much like it did 4 or 5 centuries ago. The inside, of course, has been transformed. But they put together a very interesting learning project for children to learn to understand the relation between the medieval city of Amsterdam and the contemporary city. And so they, through the use of mapping and GPS technology, they made a game, indeed a competitive game, where 2 teams would go out into the city with GPS. They'd be given questions that have to identify old buildings and in relation to their modern sort of siting. And then they'd have to call back to a control group at the Waag Society itself, again of kids, posing certain questions. The kids in the control group would then Google the answers and get it back to them. And this would be a game spread over 2 days in which they're literally learning to navigate the city and learning a history lesson as they navigate the city. And it produced for 12 and 13-year-olds, which is quite extraordinary. So it's a structured learning environment, but something where also they're out on their own interacting with each other. And it says something about learning. So what does it say? It says that learning, of course, is interactive, that it's collaborative, that children learn from each other, or people learn from each other as much as they learn from maturer people, or how we like to think of ourselves as mature people, that there are networks of learning that plug into each other. And so this led us to thinking about this shifting notion of institutions in the face of the digital, that institutions, as Kathy mentioned, and as we've defined to a greater degree in the document, are what we're calling mobilizing networks. Right, which break down the walls, the literal walls of learning institutions, allow them to shift over time. They're not just mobilizing networks, but they're the networking of mobilities, of various forms of mobility. And those notions of shifting institutions, I think, are important in the kind of world in which we engage. And indeed, part of the grant program that we're looking to in the future will be putting the network of grantees into a kind of mobilizing network with each other to produce new outcomes out of those interactive activities. There are, of course, a number of challenges. We should be quite honest about this. There are a number of challenges that we face from all of this. We don't know how this is going to play out. We don't know what outcomes actually are going to be produced. They'll be good and they'll be bad. and we should face up to the experimentation of this and learn from the bad as much as from the good. There are, of course, also divides. People learn in communities, they learn from communities. There's a generational divide. I started with the on-the-bus metaphor. In that sense, you could almost see the facility with contemporary technology on the part of kids as the kind of revolution that we were engaged with, in the 60s in a different kind of way, right? So it's a way of outdoing your parents. I mean, you're doing things that they have no knowledge of for the most part. And so those things pose challenges too. So I'll just end by saying that I think these challenges are learning possibilities as well, and we should be open to them.
Thank you, David and Kathy. We now turn to Drs. Mozingo and Hester, and I want to say that some of this discussion of World of Warcraft and Second Life and virtual organizations probably feels a little far from what is the core of your work. But we greatly appreciate your being here and welcome your comments and thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning again, and I want to say thank you to Kathy for inviting Durham Public Schools to be part of this really most engaging conversation. I would like to actually redesign my notes on the spot. Defining what schools can be in the 21st century in terms of digital media, I think is an interesting question. But it's no secret that digital technology has dramatically transformed the way we teach and the way our students learn. 25 to 50 years ago, we actually gave students pencils and paper as a primary tool. Now we can actually seat 6- and 7-year-olds in front of a computer and we say basically do your own thing. The computer and other technology has become the primary tool through which students learn and through which students learn in our school system. Would you agree that the images in this slide do not represent youth of today? Yesterday's kids watched more black and white TV, including me. These kids also spent less time on the computer. The world has changed and is still changing, and educators must make schools as innovative as the rest of the society. By changing, pre-K-12 educators can meet the learning needs of the new generation. Laptops, internet, iPods, and many other technologies require school systems to innovate and to transform into institutions that use technology as a tool, and we say as a tool, to facilitate teaching and learning. This conference posed a key question, and the question was, if Henry Ford were to come back today, would it be a good thing for him to walk into any school and feel right at home? We said absolutely not. We thought that it would be embarrassing for him to reappear and walk in our schools and to feel at home. So what are the implications for public schools? Educators must think differently about teaching and learning. Educators must recognize that technology is the best tool to create engaging classroom environments. So many of our students, as we've seen already, can play video games, use Game Boys, communicate through IM, and just listen to music all at the same time. Expanding the pipeline of knowledge through technology is essential for helping children achieve, succeed, and to prosper to prosper now and throughout life. So next, Nancy Hester is going to provide you some examples of how we are expanding the use of digital technology in the Durham Public Schools, but we still have a long ways to go.
Thank you, Terry, and again, I want to thank everyone for inviting Durham Public Schools. And I'm like Terry, I'm just going to trash all this stuff and just talk from my heart.
Redesign our whole school system.
Actually, they've gotten me so stirred, and
Yeah.
I walked in this morning. I've had a cold for about a week, and was kind of really, this is going to be hard to do today. But now, as Terry said, my mind is spinning. Mm-hmm. What a wonderful thing, and I'm so passionate about this, that all of you are here to talk about this most important issue, because it is important. And I cannot tell you, school districts across this nation face this struggle every day. Kids do know what's best. You want to know how kids learn? Just ask them. Observe them. Everything that's been said today, it's quite clear. Terry pointed out cell phones. Cell phones are no longer just cell phones. You've seen the latest phones. They have games on them. They text with them. They take pictures with them. They post those pictures everywhere on their MySpace. That's how they socially get together. We have got so far to go. In education, kids come to us as volunteers. You and I went and did what we were supposed to because our parents probably expected that. That's not how they come to the classroom today. They come in as volunteers. Teachers must learn to design work that is engaging, and it cannot be done without technology. It just cannot happen. Terry and I had the opportunity to visit High-Tech High in San Diego, California last year. What a wonderful experience. We went into a building that did not look like a school. It looked like a warehouse. Actually, it was no Army base.
It was a
if I
Naval
remember
Academy,
correctly.
Naval Training Center.
And that was good because the ceilings they were not there, and wireless could just run everywhere. Kids who walked in, checked out their computer, we never saw one textbook. Actually, we couldn't even tell who the teacher was.
It's very different. We couldn't.
For real, I'm not even being funny.
That's true.
The students were facilitating learning. Not the teacher being the facilitator, students were. They didn't raise their hand to leave the room to go to the restroom. They did not have a cafeteria. They did not have a media center. And they all were engaged in project-based learning. And guess what? In those highest state testing, those projects fit the standards of that state of California. They didn't try to make the test drive the curriculum. They took their project, and then how do we work those standards in there? Because they are important. They are absolutely important. We cannot say that they're not. But they had done a very creative way. Terry and I actually viewed a classroom where they were growing tomato plants on Mars, I believe.
Jane, working with Jane Goodall.
Yeah. But once again, it gave us such a wonderful insight of what it can be. So why doesn't this happen all across the United States? Why is it just there? Well, there's lots of reasons why. Teachers are not up to par, of course, on this. They're scared to death of it. A lot of them are. The teachers that were coming out of this wonderful institution are not. They're helping some of our teachers because they have been more using technology for their own learning. School districts generally do not have wonderful IT staffs like we see today. Unfortunately, we have taken warmed-up educators who have an interest in it, and they've had to try to set up networks. Because you know what? None of this works if you don't have a strong backbone. So districts are faced with that challenge. But regardless of what challenges we're faced with, the truth of it is this. We have got to find the way to infuse technology in our classrooms, that it's not about technology. It is about the learning. It's about the rigor. It's about the relevance that we've heard so many people speak about today. How do we make this relevant to their world today? Because you know what? They're finding ways to do it. Students are finding ways to do it. And we see this every day, even in our schools. I've mentioned this earlier to one of our participants today. I'm much a disciple of Mel Levine out of Chapel Hill. He's a leading pediatrician in learning styles. And one of the things that Mel Levine says is that in order for a student to survive, he uses the word survive, which I think is interesting, school every day is the vitamin pill of success. They need to take that vitamin pill every day. They need to find some success every day in what they do, in some form or fashion. Technology opens that doorway. I really do believe that. It is amazing to me the distance we have come in education without the use of technology, what little we have done. We're making strides in our school system. I'm not going to sit and tell you we're where we should be, but we are working on it. The interactive, next year we hope to have active boards in all of our classrooms. It will become the standard when we build a new school. But that's just still one part of it. That's just touching on a little bit of it. But, and I want to say I'm doom and gloom, but I think this is a great thing that we're all talking about this, and I hope it goes back and far-reaching for what everyone here has such a passion for, because it is very important. Dropouts across the United States, you hear about the numbers. Where are those students? We could have captured them. We have an alternative school in our district where kids have been recommended for a long-term suspension. But in lieu of that, they can go to this alternative school. excuse me, a couple years ago, Terry and I said, you know, why can't they build a computer over there? They love that. Well, we got a little pushback. We said, no. We're going to build computers at the school. This will be a great thing. Within one day, this is the truth, in one day, the teacher picked up a phone, called me, and he said, Nancy, the kids who never come are coming every day.
Yeah.
And guess what? They didn't even have transportation to get there. Now, it might have been 5, but you know what? They kept showing back up every day. They were putting their hands on something, creating something. And it was about just putting that together. But guess what? They started learning about just technology and that spark of interest. We have a huge responsibility, every one of us in this room, to go forth wherever we touch, whatever world we're in, and see what we can do. For example, I would love for the city of Durham to be wireless. I wonder if your cities are wireless. Isn't that a shame? We should be wireless. I can tell you, I can take you to the poorest neighborhoods in this city, and you know what you'll see on top of their homes? Dishes. The windows may be falling in, but you'll see a dish up on the roof. You'll see cable running. You know why? Because kids want it too. And kids still kind of rule those households. But again, I'd like to see cities move to wireless. I think, what's it, Philadelphia, Terry helped me, I think that was a city that, and they're doing wonderful things there.
Right, it is.
The homes are changing. Cultures are changing. People's values are changing because they're bringing them, opening a world up to them that they would have never seen before. Never. So there's lots of work to be done. We love the work that we're doing. We're very clear that technology is a big part of the work that we need to do in our public school system in our district. I wanted to share one thing with you. Next year, we are opening a new tech high on one of our campuses that we're very excited about, and it will be around project-based learning. And we can't wait to see how that turns out because we know that's the right track for kids. And once that gets going, how will we take the best of that and filter it into other classrooms within our district? The good news for us, my time's up. The good news for us is this. We've got a strong backbone, and that's what you've got to have. You've got to have that fiber running. You've got to have that, or none of this can work. And, but we're getting there, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for those wonderful thoughts and comments. We're going to open it up to questions and or comments. And I'm happy to call on folks if we don't have any. I know many of you in the room. If you could come up to the microphone. Ron?
I'm Ron Robinson, and I'm at UC Santa Barbara in Sociology Department. And I was a teacher for a bunch of years in high school and participated in school reform efforts on various levels. So and my research is related to using film media and interactive digital media as transformative learning platforms in schools, as well as enablers for interdisciplinary research and collaboration. So one of the things that I've found in my work as a teacher and as a researcher is that looking at these kinds of innovations, because that's what we're talking about, and so understanding them through the use of innovation and technology diffusion theory, because it's very important to understand that there is a framework for how these innovations get diffused, where the resistances are, et cetera. And a lot of the things that we find is that innovation in the public schools is penalized. So teachers who are innovative and use, for instance, these kind of new media, it's not recognized oftentimes by the administration and the people who are making the important decisions as comporting to what their vision of what teaching is supposed to be. So using video games, for instance, or other forms of media are kind of looked down upon, very much so in terms of the culture of the school. And the other thing is that youth culture, hip-hop culture, et cetera, these are the most vibrant and dynamic aspects of if innovation is to be diffused, that the innovators and the early adopters are the kids, and then those adults who they have basically think are the cool ones and that they relate to become that critical mass and have to be really organized and orchestrated in a certain kind of way for this to work because the resistance is going to come from many different segments of both the school population and even the external population in order for these kinds of things to happen. So what I would like to propose is really looking at a process of evaluation, a visual analytic process of concept mapping, certain variation on that, in terms of how feedback is extracted from the various stakeholders. This qualitative feedback from the kids, the teachers, et cetera, in terms of what the innovations are going to be and what they see as the issues and barriers related to their own education and why they are tuning out, dropping out like flies in many communities, and they just can't even stand to be in the room. And so that this data can be actually quantified and looked at and through a concept map visualized so people can get a better sense of how and what's really going on in the school, so that that feedback can actually be implemented, because then you have a consensus model that people can see, that the quantifiable data you can't contradict in terms of what this is about. So that might help facilitate actually being able to implement these new innovations. So those are just some ideas. And lastly, I would love to hear some more, maybe later on, about the video gaming school in New York, because I have a real specific interest in that. Thank you.
Did you want to respond?
Well, I just want to say that's an interesting question, because one of the things we have been looking at in our school system, our 8th graders are required to complete a 4-year plan, and historically that plan has been completed on paper. This year we have gone to an electronic version of completing the plan. But one of the decisions we've made in our system is to survey our 8th graders and 9th graders and ask 8th graders and 9th graders what they would like to learn and how they would like to learn. So what I want to be able to do is to go back and incorporate some of your ideas into our survey and get more feedback from our students in terms, and that will help us actually change the environment and to sustain the innovations that we're trying to implement over time.
If you could introduce yourself and then ask your question, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Dan Connolly, here from MIT and the World Wide Web Consortium.
Wow.
This is all fascinating. I've got 3 young boys in school, and I realize they're picking up cultural values from Pokemon and stuff.
Right.
And it's real.
Yeah, we know.
I have more of a comment than a question. Somewhere in the conversation, it was this, after all, what is place in the digital age and stuff like the virtual stuff. So I work remotely, have been since 1997, 10 years of this stuff. I work for the World Wide Web Consortium. I work, I eat, sleep, and breathe virtual work. And I suggest that place in the virtual world is brand loyalty and attention. Huh. All right? You can't be at too many things at one time. But, you can be, you can't pay attention. You can only pay attention to so many things at a time. And you can only remember so many brand names.
Thank you.
Go
ahead.
Hi, I'm Sally Jane Norman from Newcastle University up in the northeast of England. And it's really exciting to be here and to be able to take advantage of this enthusiasm and this buzz. And I have a specific question that maybe relates to my context. In the northeast, this is the poorest region in England. The life expectancy there is the lowest. And it's the region that's doing the most on social gerontology and on aging. And we've got a very strong digital technology drive in my university and in my region. And what we're trying to do at the same time is to look at issues of intergenerational learning. And if we're talking about ad hoc learning spaces, if we're talking about learning spaces that are outside of the schools, then I think we have to be careful that we're not ghettoizing children as an age group and not blocking them off from this huge demographic resource, which is the older people that we are all very fast becoming. And I think, and I think that anybody who's watching the demographic curves, I think it's really important for us to get onto this bandwagon before it just becomes a technology sales driver. Assistive technologies, keep grandma at home as long as possible with an automated spoon feed. I mean, that's not what it's about. It's about these intergenerational learning contexts. And so I was wondering whether here there was reflection on these issues, because I've heard wonderful stuff about kids, 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 kids. You know, I remember the first time I went to SIGGRAPH, there was a sort of a teen section, then it became SIG Kids, and then I was thinking, when are they going to be doing, you know, intrauterine SIGGRAPH events? I mean, what happens to the other end of the scale? I'm really interested in this issue of transmissibility across generations. Also, yesterday in a rather strange presentation that I did with a colleague from UCL in London, we were talking about intergenerational equity, about ancestry, about cultural heritage. And I would really like to know whether this is being considered as an issue here in the same urgent way as youth is being considered as an issue. Thank you.
Great question.
I'm Tom Hoban, a professor of sociology at NC State. I'd like to thank The Independent for writing a story about this, or I never would have heard about it. I'll just address, so I was going to make a couple comments basically on what I'm calling the generation canyon. I mean, we had a generation gap in the 60s, but it's basically all around technology. People under 30, give or take a few years, generation me, whatever you want to call it, has grown up comfortable with technology. Most older, let's just say people for now, got dragged kicking and screaming into it through work. They have very negative views. Even deans and other high-level officials are worried about predators on the internet. So I've run into that personally. I had a big confrontation over the use of MySpace in teaching in the fall at NC State. But the other point I was really going to make about the youth, and I agree with what you're saying. I mean, what everybody's saying, the problem is everybody needs a third place. Everybody needs a place to hang out. When I was a kid in the suburbs of Chicago, we could hang out in the parking lots of McDonald's, whatever we wanted to do. Then you could hang out at shopping centers. Then you could hang out somewhere else. But right now, you can't even get to some of the shopping centers unless your parents got a credit card. You know, they're banning the youth from the shopping centers. And there's no place else to go. So that's why MySpace has become so vibrant and so wonderful in many ways. I'm a big proponent of it, obviously. I think I was the first person over 50 outside of California 2 years ago to join it. I mean, so I'm really impressed with it. I'm doing exactly what you all were saying. I'm learning from the youth. I'm not trying to teach much. I'm listening a lot. And if you really want to listen to what the youth are saying, buy some albums by Damian Marley. Just leave it at that.
Thank you. Yes. Does any?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would like to respond to the? Yeah, Julie, do you want to say something?
Say just a couple of words about you're very where did you go? Oh no, not you. I'll come to you in a minute. But you're very interesting and provocative comments about the need to remember that this is not just about young people. I think that at MacArthur we see young people as an access point. But unlike, I would say, the past decades when youth have actually been sort of ghettoized into a youth culture, actually technology can open that up because there's sort of an ageless quality to interactions through technology. Ageless, raceless, genderless, avatar-driven kind of interaction. And so, but at the same time, at MacArthur we always like to see what are the interconnections amongst our various strands of work. So at the same time we're investing deeply in this whole line of inquiry and support for innovation. We are just now starting an interdisciplinary research network looking at the implications of an aging society. Not so much looking at the unit of analysis, the individual older person, but looking at society and its preparation for this giant bulge of baby boomers moving into their older years, coupled with the extension of disability-free older years that have come as a consequence of medical advance. And so the idea there is, the question there is, can society actually be prepared to support the kind of generative activities that older people can engage in to stay connected across generations and to support their continuing contribution to society, which is going to be essential if we're going to remain both creative and economically competitive. So I see technology as a way to actually connect these two strands of thought. As a matter of fact, one of the experiments that we are looking at supporting is an intergenerational interaction in Baltimore public schools, where older people are supported to work in public schools, and the outcome is not about it's not about the activities of the older people. It's about their health and their increase in health health quality that they actually get from the interaction with young people and the kind of activities that they engage in intergenerationally. So contrary to your fear that this is all about kids, it's about kids in context and opening up that context through technology.
Kathy or David, did you want to comment?
I second the recognition of a really fabulous question and an important point concerning intergenerational learning and the place of older people in society. I'm reminded again of Aristotle, who says one doesn't get to be a philosopher until you're at least about 65 years old, right? So in a sense, most of us are still sort of reaching to that point. Older people are repositories, you might say, but also of, to some degree, if not of wise choice making themselves, at least of being able to reflect on the wise choices they didn't make, right? And that becomes a way of engaging in a conversation, at least about learning and education. I mean, if there is one thing that I would point to as the centerpiece of learning, it would be how to get folks, everybody, in a society like this, where one can't look to most politicians or corporate leaders as the repository of making wise choices, for the most part. What does one draw on in order to do that? And older people, I think, would be a fantastic resource. I'm also reminded again, not to dwell on the Bach Society, but they developed an incredible networking tool for sharing stories in facilitated living environments that exactly put in play older people with younger people about collecting memories and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I thank you again for sort of, reminding us of it.
I would second all that and simply just add that I guess I don't really believe that age is the repository of wisdom, or that youth is, or that things like racism or sexism or homophobia are things that are limited to one generation. And unfortunately, a lot of those things get repeated online the way they do offline. So the job is, again, not just to think about technology in itself, but to think of it in context that must include attitudes that are handed down, humans that have stories to tell and they're handed down, and what those connections are, both the frictions between them and the positive communications between them as well. I think sometimes learning is about not doing what's come before, and sometimes the most amazing learning is people can change their minds. Even elderly people can change their minds and be bold, and both of those things are good.
Right, so I just want to expose myself a little bit as a young person here.
Can you introduce yourself?
When I was in high school,
just tell us who you are.
My name's Nicole Starcelski. I'm from the University of California, Santa Barbara. And when I was in high school, I went to my world history teacher, and I said, well, I already know all of this. I've been playing this game imperialism for a long time, and I know all about textiles and commodities and occupation. We should really play this game in class, because there's a lot of stuff in here that's not in the textbook. It wasn't until I got to college that I realized that maybe imperialism might be a bad thing. But in fact, a lot of the structures of the textbook and the game reinforced each other. And so far, in discussions of digital learning, it seems so much that we're talking about bringing technology into classrooms, whereas outside of the classroom, kids are already using this. And one way to do it, and kind of a cheap way to do it, would be to use these texts that they're already using and to discuss those in the classroom. So that way they're engaged, because of course, they're playing imperialism already. They're thinking about this all the time. So what they want to do is come in and talk about the game that they've been playing. And so using that as a discussion might be a way to get people to talk about it, or in an English class to have them analyze comments that people write on MySpace. Like, that's all they want to do is talk about MySpace. So that might be like a low-tech way to integrate and engage students through technology. So thank you.
That's terrific. Yeah.
I wanted just to add one comment. In our system, we're establishing new standards with our relationships with textbook publishers. And so all of the books that we begin to adopt, they must have an online feature. And actually, currently, we have several students that have textbooks online, access to textbooks online. So we offer them an option. Just wanted to just, low tech, but a change.
Yeah, I would also say that we've been working pretty closely with an academic named Kurt Squire at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who's working really hard on a game called Civilization, which many of you probably know, and is building out curriculum and supports around civilization in an online community. So I think that there's the beginning of that kind of conversation happening.